Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path. It's Dara here again today, and I'm going to be talking about my list for the Coventry GT, which I'll be attending on the first weekend of November. So by the time this goes live, it'll either be just before the event or it'll have just started. So, I'm not really too worried about anyone seeing this video and leaking any of my tactics or anything funny like that. But yeah, so I just want to say before we start that this list has kind of come together over the last, I suppose, couple of months, maybe 5 or 6 months since I kind of expressed the interest that I would be attending this event. And an awful lot of advice and discussion has happened in our Red Path Discord, where you've all contributed some ideas, discussions, talking tactics around the list concept that I'm bringing. And throughout the past few months, I've really changed my mind on some units that previously I had very much dismissed, and other units that I thought were great and have since kind of fallen out of favor with me. And that's by and large thanks to the fantastic advice that all of you have been giving me. So I just want to say a special thank you for all of that. It's been really helpful. And yeah, it's definitely, this is a community list at this point, it's not just mine anymore. So without further ado, let's dive into the video. So, the list. My list is composed of a battalion detachment of the World Leaders, as you might expect. It's headed up by my Warlord, who is a Chaos Lord, no jump pack or anything, he's just rocking around on foot. He's got Gorefather as his relic weapon. There's also a Dark Apostle in my list with his 2 Dark Disciples, and he's bringing the 5+ Invulnerable Save Prayer. So, you'll kind of see the reason why I'm bringing that prayer as we go on with the list. But yeah, I think he's actually a very, very useful asset in my list particularly, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. In my troop slot, I have a full 6 slots taken up in my troops, so the entire battalion kind of worth of troops are all occupied. We have 4 5-man Berserker squads, as you might expect, with Chainsword and Chain Axe, nothing fancy about it. And then we have 2 10-man Cultist squads. Moving on from that, we have my Elites section, and in my Elites I'm taking 2 Chaos Leviathan Dreadnoughts, my boys. I love them so much, and yeah, I just can't leave home without them these days. So they're there, hanging out, having a good time. They've got Gravflux Bombards, Siege Drills, and the Volkite Calibers, or whatever the name of the Volkite gun is, you can take on them. Moving on from my Elites, we then have some fast attack choices. So I have a 5-man Raptor squad, just Chainsword, Bolt Pistol, Sergeant has double Chainswords. They're there to kind of just hang out and do some good stuff. We have an 8-man Raptor squad. Again, fairly similar loadout, except 2 of the Raptors actually have Meltaguns. And then we have 8 Warp Talons, which, if you've been following along, it took me a long time to come around to these guys, but now that I have, whew, they are so spicy. But we'll get into the tactics for them in a little bit. So moving on from the Raptors and the Warp Talons and all that good stuff, we have the 2 Termite Drills for my dedicated transports. So, if you know me, hashtag drill gang. And they've got the Volkite on them as well. And finally, in the Flyer detachment, we actually have a Helldrake with a Bale Flamer, which is, not necessarily the most popular choice, but it's kind of won my heart in the last while. So that's basically the list, and we'll go in now and I'll talk a little bit about tactics of how it's going to function. Okay, so let's talk the tactics of this list, and this is quite an interesting one, and obviously it's matchup dependent as well. My tactics for various opponents are going to vary, but I'll try and touch on some of the more popular kind of meta armies and stuff that I'm expecting to face, and my thought process of how the list is going to function in a general sort of take-all-comer situation. So most of the time, if you know me, I'm a big fan of starting my 2 Termite Drills on the board, kind of treating them as something in between a Land Raider and a Rhino in terms of an aggressive push into the middle, kind of utilizing the Meltaguns, utilizing the Volkite nice and early, and they'll, for most games, will be starting on the board. Now, in certain matchups like Freebooter Orcs, Admech Plains, those kind of matchups, I'm probably going to deep strike them just for safety's sake, but I would say probably in the majority of my games, they will be on the board. And the Dark Apostle is always going to be near them when I deploy to confer the 5+ invulnerable save on them, because I just think it adds a whole other layer of survivability to these drills. I mean, like, their toughness 8, they have 14 wounds, that's great, but they really lack an invuln, and I have found that when I didn't bring the Dark Disciple, it really did hurt the list, and it especially hurts the drills. There's lots of interesting ways you can actually utilize the invulnerable save prayer, but for the most part, that's kind of his function, is to protect the drills for long enough until they can kind of move out and sort of start to operate independently once they've kind of deposited their Berserker cargo. And so moving on from that, most of the time, each drill is going to be full of 10 Berserkers, so the 2 5-man squads. And the Lord is probably going to be in one of them most of the time. It's interchangeable with him, it's quite interesting. Sometimes he hops out in the first turn to give the rerolls for the Leviathans. Sometimes he doesn't. You kind of have to play around with it. And the fact that I've given him Violent Urgency as well really helps if I'm going to be putting those drills in Deep Strike, because especially if I bring the 2 of them in at the same time, he's going to hop out, he's going to give them all rerolls to hit when they come in, and then they're all going to have 8-inch charges. I mean, you would hope with, 4 Berserker squads, 2 drills, and a Lord, 7 charges I could be making, potentially, that some of those 8-inch charges are going to come off, but we know how it is from charges with Deep Strike. It's not a very reliable tactic, nor would I claim it is a tactic I will be employing all that much. So that's kind of the idea for them. Then we've got the 2 10-man cultist squads, which are probably going to be occupying my backfield objectives. Now, previously, I was a big fan of running the bigger kind of 20-man, 15 to 20-man cultist blobs, because you can kind of push them up. They can be quite ignorant. They can really get in your face, and you can tide of traders them, all that kind of good stuff. But in more games than not, I just found I really didn't have a good place to use this cultist blob. They seem to kind of get in the way of my dreadnoughts, get in the way of the drills and stuff, and often I found they were just hanging out of the back and not being shot anyway, so having the 20 was a little bit redundant. So I stripped back those points and I reinvested them to make that Raptor squad bigger, that 8-man squad. So moving on from that, it's probably a good point to talk about them. So we've got the small 5-man Raptor squad, who I would say almost all the time are going to start in Deep Strike, because they will literally just come in an enemy quarter, do retrieve Octarius data. If I've taken engage, going to score me engage points as well. I mean, it's hard to say no for their points, for getting 4 victory points for a retrieve sector. It's just very powerful. And to be honest, they can Barney in combat as well. Like, you know, you charge 5 Raptors into something, and as world leaders, they can pick up a couple of weak infantry targets. Then we have the 8-man squad, which is an interesting one. I've kind of been playing around with a strong Alpha Strike with the Warp Talons in my last bunch of practice games, and you know, I really like it. It's a very powerful mechanic for sort of locking your enemy in their deployment zone, and it definitely buys me the time I need to push my drills and my dreadnoughts up the board. So I kind of doubled down on it with this, with bringing the 8-man Raptor squad as well, because they can also fly up the board with a Apoplectic Frenzy in the first turn. They can Melt-A-Gun something, they might get lucky, it's only 2 Melt-A-Shots, so it's not very reliable. And then they can also charge in alongside the Warp Talons, and if you've got a situation where you have a big squad of Raptors and a big squad of Warp Talons in your own lines in the first turn, and then a Helldrake comes in as well, that's a big problem for a lot of enemies, and you can really box some people into their deployment zones, which causes a whole world of scoring problems for them. And honestly, the games that I've been winning, that's how I'm winning them, is boxing them in for a turn or two, having the opponents have to deal with these combat threats in their face in the first turn before they can turn around and deal with the other things coming up the board. I just think it's a very, very kind of solid game plan. Obviously, it does rely a little bit on going first, but if I don't go first, I can always move the Raptors into interesting positions in the mid-board with a Apoplectic Frenzy. The same with the Warp Talons. I can hold them back against certain armies like White Scars and Blood Angels. There's a lot of different kind of things you can do with this unit. And one of the things that's really useful is that they kind of act as like a buffer zone. Especially with their 12-inch movement, they can be in a lot of places that I need them to be. So they can occupy a section of the board, they can screen out Deep Strike, they can do actions if they have to. They're just a really good utilitarian unit, and the fact that they have jump packs, the fact that they fly, hopping in between runes, hopping in between obscuring, all that kind of good stuff, it really, really helps. They can be where I need them to be. They can be a fast response unit if I'm not using them as the Alpha Strike. So then we have the 2 Leviathan Dreadnoughts, which are my bully units, and I'm a big fan of that kind of like slower play with them, where I move them into the mid-board. They occupy a space, they hold that space, and generally can lay down a fair bit of damage with the Gravflux Bombard and with the Siege Drill. Now, I've noticed that there are actually quite a lot of Space Marine players attending this event already, which is fantastic because the Grav just loves to play into Space Marines, just picks them up so easily. Siege Drill is fantastic against them as well, and then you have the Volkite to top it all off. It's honestly, it's very annoying, and they're tough to kill, you know, with a 5+ invulnerable save, -1 damage, 2+ base save. It's a whole annoyance of hurts that, generally speaking, from what I've found, it's a rare game where both Leviathans die. So yeah, just a fantastic bully unit. It does kind of hurt that it costs a CP to bring them, but, you know, we take those. And then obviously you've got the drills moving up with them as well, and the thing about the Apostle, he's kind of vibing at the start, he's giving off his protection, but as the game goes on, he can really move into some interesting positions. He can confer the invulnerable save to the Raptors, for example, or to some cultists if he needs to. He can also switch it up and do the reroll hit rolls prayer, which is fantastic if all my berserkers get out of the drills and they just need that little bit of extra oomph depending on what they're going into. So yeah, it's interesting that I have this like play around with the characters and stuff where they can kind of react rather than act themselves. I mean, the problem is they're very squishy, both of them. Like they will die, but one thing I've kind of been interested in recently is using the Chaos Boon table, especially for the Lord, because there's actually a fairly high chance that you can give him a 3+ invulnerable save from the Boon table, which is a bit obnoxious when he's running around with Gorefather, and he's just really good at going into infantry squads. If you spike 2 6s on that wound roll, you could be picking up 6 infantry models in some cases. Especially, I've had him go into some sacristans and just really pick up a lot of those, and if you've played against them yourself, you'll know they're hard to kill with conventional means, so he can be good for that. So yeah, basically the list functions as a staggered wave formation in the majority of cases. So you're going to have, in the first turn, the Helldrake and 2 jump pack units right in your face, penciling you into your deployment zone, giving you very little options to move, very little options of targets, because you're going to have to deal with these big combat threats straight away before they, you know, keep going into your lines. And the hope is that, like, especially with the Warp Talents, they can take out a significant threat in the first turn. I mean, I've had them kill a Battle Wagon, I've had them kill Morven Val, I've had them kill like some pretty good targets that like I did not want to be dealing with. And then with the Raptors, they can kind of bully some not as powerful targets, obviously, due to their weapons, but they can still take out their fair share of things, especially if you're running 8 of them. The Helldrake, it's a bit more of a meme, but you can do some really funky movement blocking with him, some fun character sniping if someone is less experienced and leave a character out in the open. And yeah, like all sorts of weird shenanigans like that. So that's the first wave. Your second wave, it's probably going to be the Dreadnoughts. They're moving into the middle. They're going onto objectives. They're staying there for as long as possible, laying down some heavy firepower and being really annoying threats if you want to charge anything. And coming up alongside them, you've probably got the Drills. The Drills just kind of move in such a way that like the Berserkers are going to go where they need to go the most. So, you know, tufting enemies off objectives, occupying areas of the board where it's really annoying to have OBSEC, that kind of thing. And then, worst comes to worst, I can always Tide of Traders a Cultist squad into a quarter if I need to get Rod. I can have the Dark Disciples doing it as well. There's a lot of fun little mechanics, basically, that I can kind of capitalize on, shall we say. There's a bit of jank from old book rules that I'm also kind of taking advantage of here. So yeah, that's, I mean, it's a very simplistic form of how the list is going to function. And again, certain armies like Dark Eldar, it's a much cagier game where I have to be really careful about what units I put forward, you know, first, and kind of the way that I trade. I've had a lot of experience with trading into Dark Eldar, and it's very hard to trade up in a similar way with the Sisters, but you can kind of go a little bit harder on them in the first turn due to Death to the False Emperor. And then when it comes to the likes of Orcs and Admech, especially the Freebooter Orcs, you gotta deep strike the Drills. Like, those are the games that I'll be going into not expecting to win, if I'm totally honest, especially Freebooter Orcs. It's just obnoxious. The plan is to start as much as I possibly can off the board and just take a heavy hit on the first turn. And basically, like I said, I'm not hoping to win, so just scrape as many points as I can. Similarly with the Admech, but to a lesser extent, I think, again, due to the fact that Chaos enjoys fighting Imperium. I think with the Admech, I'll probably have the Warp Talons in reserve, a Drill, maybe 2. I need to work out the exact points for that. And yeah, basically play around them. You definitely have to play reactively in that matchup. So they're the ones I'm really worried about. I'm really confident playing into Space Marines. I think I have the Space Marine game on lock at this point. They just hate Grav. They hate Volkite. I've got a lot of it. They hate Death to the False Emperor and 5+. They hate the weight of attacks that Berserkers and Warp Talons and Raptors put into them. Like, a lot of my guns are loaded out in such a way, and my combat obviously as well, where it's like they're either a lot of single damage or high enough damage that -1 to damage doesn't really matter. So for example, Death Guard, if I'm firing my Grav Flux into them, it becomes 3 damage, which goes back to 2 damage, so I'm still killing Plague Marines. So yeah, stuff like that, it's nice, you know. I'm not really too worried about any form of Marine matchup. Thousand Suns, it's going to be tough. I'll probably have to fire the Cultist forward in those cases to absorb some mortal wounds. But again, if I go first into the Thousand Suns, I'll just send the Raptors and Warp Talons in to do as much damage as I can, maybe take out some Key Psychers, that kind of a thing. Grey Knights I haven't really played, need to do a little bit more research into them, but Jamie's last video gave me some good insights into how I'm going to tackle those guys. And similarly, I mean, a lot of my tactic is going to be just putting a lot of pressure on my Warp Talons that they are going to have to do good for me. So yeah, no sweat for those guys. They just pick up whatever they want to pick up with the right buffs. Apart from that, I mean, Dark Eldar is always a tough and fun game, but one I can manage. From the old codexes, I'm not too worried. You know, Tau should be easy mode, GSC, easy mode. Custodes could be tough, I think. Custodes could be a challenging one, but again, I've got the right weapons, I've got the right kit to take them down. I'm not too worried, and I have the board presence compared to them as well. So that's more or less the long and short of the list. It's a fun one. It's one that feels fluffy. Got a lot of story going on in it as well, so it's not the most cutting edge thing. I don't have a Lord of Skulls. I don't have, you know, all the cool stuff that the best World Leader players like to bring, the 3 Vindicators and all that. But I've got the things that I like, and I think it's not going to do terribly. My hope for the event is that I'm going to go 4-4, so 4 wins, 4 losses. That would be a really pleasing result for me. If I did better, that would be amazing. But I'm expecting, realistically, that I'll probably go 3-5. If I'm going to be completely honest, it's going to be tough. My list isn't great, and you know, despite all my practice, I'm still a pretty average player. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of it, really. To be honest, that's the list. That's what it does. That's what I hope it will do. In any case, and yeah, it's just good fun. I'm really looking forward to it. Getting really excited to go over now, meet some cool people over there, and just have a really good time. So let me know down below what you think of the list, how you think I'm going to do, all that kind of carry on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So thanks everyone for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and kill me a bird.